From Arkansas, Mr. Hill for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the panel for being here. And of course, we're not here to talk about Obamacare. We're not here to talk about Donald Trump. We're here in an open hearing to try to give some clarity to this transaction that has been, and I think, inadequately disclosed by the administration. So the fact that we're doing part of this not in a classified setting is for the benefit of the American people so that they have more clarity about this transaction and all the details around it. And I thank the chairman for scheduling it. I'm confused because my friend from South Carolina began talking about President Clinton's signing of the Victims Act back in 2000, and that's sort of related also to my friend's comments from Minnesota. I'm used to gap accounting and not government double speak and double counting, but I'm trying to understand that if, as you said, Ms. Grosz, that the $400 million was in that 2000 Act was appropriated by Congress, did we release Iran then from their $400 million obligation? Because we keep talking about it as if we froze this account in 1979 and then pursuant to the Algiers Accord, that money was still sitting there and we paid interest on it. But in fact, we in that act paid out $400 million of appropriated money. So is the $400 million then remaining in the FMS account not the United States' money? In other words, was Iran released from that obligation?
Congressman, if I could try to clarify that. Under the Victims of Trafficking Act, Congress appropriated $400 million. This would be in subsection B of that act that was referred to earlier. Funds not otherwise made available in an amount not to exceed the total amount in the foreign military sales account at the date of enactment, which was $400 million. Then in a subsequent provision of that act, the United States government, because those were appropriated funds, the United States government was then subrogated to those claims, meaning that they became the claims of the U.S. government. And the U.S. government was then in a position to pursue those claims against Iran. And so in the overall settlement, we factored in those claims in reaching the settlement that we did in January.
Well, that seems, you've both used that term, factored into the overall settlement, but it just seems in conflict with that law to me in my reading of it. It says, no funds shall be paid to Iran or released to Iran from property blocked under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act or from the Foreign Military Sales Fund until subrogated claims have been dealt with to the satisfaction of the United States. And so, in my view, the satisfaction of the United States includes the people of the United States and the people's representatives here in Congress. So whose signature, whose wet signature authorized this settlement? Did Secretary Lew approve this settlement and make the recommendation to President Obama?
I'm really not in a position to know at what level,
Mr.
but
Hearn,
I believe—
can you shed light on that? Was this, I know the State Department led the negotiations, but who approved this transaction and its structure? Did Secretary Lew approve it?
This settlement was the subject of a number of interagency discussions, as you can imagine. Secretary Lew, acting under Secretary Zubin, were part of those discussions. I don't know the answer to your question beyond that.
And Secretary Lew, of course, was the director of OMB in 2000, so I assume he knows the details of this Public Law 106-386 in this particular paragraph, since he was the director of Office of Management and Budget at that time. I want to give you another shot at explaining how it factored into the overall settlement, though, because the way I take it is we released them, and in fact, the taxpayers ought to get $400 million plus accrued interest, and yet we've paid it out as a part of this overall settlement, and that's double counting to me. I just am not clear on your point.
Maybe I could give you an example. At the top of my remarks, I mentioned that in 1990, we entered into a settlement with Iran. It settled both U.S. government claims and U.S. national claims for $105 million. In my experience in claims practice, it's not unusual to settle multiple claims together at the same time. And if those are the claims of the U.S. government, we take all those into account, just as we could counterclaims. And so in the negotiation of this claim settlement with Iran, we had discussions about those claims, and they were settled along with the trust fund issues.
Well, I thank you for that answer, but Mr. Chairman, I remain confused that this is somehow double counting, and I urge our committee staff in discussions to get to the bottom of that. Last question I have for the Treasury official. Were there any IRGC members on the Iran Air flight that picked up this money and took it back to Tehran?
As I said, the money was dispersed to a representative of the Central Bank of Iran. As I understand it, there were no specially designated nationals involved.
Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the ranking member